Hey, let's go ahead and get started. A couple people might trickle in, but that's fine. Yeah, so welcome to our webinar on the case for change on accessibility, inclusivity, and equity in computer science education. We're very excited to have all of you join us, and so very excited about Brianna, Yasmine, and Richard joining us to share their insights and their expertise on the topic. As this is not only a passion for the three of them, but they've made a lot of practical and just amazing changes in the field, from curriculum development to how they educate their students about the topic to departmental changes all around. So let's get right into it. So just to introduce a bit about myself, my name is Kendra Hare. I am the marketing specialist here at CodeGrade. I've been in education, on the teaching side of education for about 15 plus years, uh, teaching in the United States and now, well, most recently in the Netherlands. Um, I have a background in rhetoric and composition and digital narratives. So yeah, and of course, please reach out to me after the webinar if you want to be in touch or you want to discuss the topic further. I'm happy to talk with you guys about it a bit more. So how the plan is today, I'm going to not do too much talking. I'm going to let our experts do most of the discussion surrounding the topic. And I know that's why you guys are here in the first place. And then at the end, I want to leave some space just to give you all an opportunity to discuss and ask questions, permit a safe space to kind of address some of those issues that are not so easily, or maybe you don't have the opportunity to talk about freely within your department. All right, so to begin, before we transition to our speakers, just to kind of go over these three terms, because in a lot of ways they intersect, and due to that, they can cause a bit of confusion for people. They're probably all terms we've heard of, but to just get a good idea of how we're thinking about it in regards to this discussion and computing education in general. So accessibility, what do we mean by that? Creating materials, resources, technologies, and environments that are accessible to all students, including those with disabilities or diverse learning needs, to ensure effective perception, understanding, navigation, interaction with educational content. So that is creating a space where all people types can perform in an educational setting. Inclusion, fostering a space for all students, regardless of background or abilities, feel welcome, valued, and empowered to fully engage in learning. This entails actively promoting diversity, equity, and a sense of belonging within the CSE community. So within that space that we create, maybe through accessible material or an accessible curriculum or a department that supports different learning types, different maybe disabilities, we can foster a space of belonging and also empowerment for those individuals where they may succeed better, or progress further within their educational trajectory. And then what is equity? Ensuring fair access to opportunities, resources, and support, especially for historically marginalized or underrepresented groups, by identifying and dismantling systematic barriers to their full participation and success. So this this term here really, a lot of times, is tackling maybe some of the biases or contentions held against certain groups that have been systematically built up, whether that's through culture, policy, or even just the structure of education itself, the institution of education itself, and tackling those narratives so that people feel that they can benefit from the resource or tool offered to them. right. Well, that's my introduction. I'm going to move it on over to Brianna. I was going to introduce everyone, but I'm going to just let everyone do that themselves. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Brianna take over, so that she
Excellent.
can, yeah, and then yeah. So.
Oh, awesome. So my name is Brianna Blaser. Can you actually share your screen and then I can just use those slides because
Oh
otherwise I'm
yeah,
going
of
to pull up
course.
the,
Yeah.
the slides. That'd be awesome.
Sure. Yeah, no
Um,
problem.
I am at the University of Washington, where I manage several grants related to disability inclusion in STEM education and careers. I'm the director for Access Computing, which is a National Science Foundation Broadening Participation in Computing Alliance. So we work with individuals across the US to work towards increasing the participation of people with disabilities in computer science education and careers. That work is twofold. One part of it is working directly with students with disabilities, community college, undergraduate, and graduate students with disabilities, to support them in mentoring and career development activities to ultimately be successful in transitioning into computing education or computing employment. But then we also work with computing departments, organizations, and employers across the country to think about ways that they can be more welcoming and accessible to people with disabilities. So really thinking about how do we make systemic changes and change our institutions in a way that they can better support people with disabilities. Awesome. So when we think about how can we change our institutions, there are a few things that we think about. There are two kind of approaches to access. One we would call accommodations, and one is universal design. So if you're familiar with accommodations, at least in the US context, most often you will get a letter from a university that says, here are the reasonable accommodations that this student should get when they are in your classroom, right? We might think about a kind of accommodation for somebody that's coming to an event outside of the classroom. And so this is a reactive approach. Somebody with a disability has entered into a space that for some reason is not accessible to them. And now we've got to make a change so that it works for that person, right? So it's individualized for one person. So this might be something like having a sign language interpreter for a deaf student who's in the room. It might mean giving access to accessible documents that you otherwise might not have given folks, right? So maybe the slides, you were just going to share them on the screen, but there's a blind student in the course, and so they need the slides so they can read them with their screen reader. A different way to think about access is the universal design approach, which this is really going to be a more proactive approach, and asks you to think about how can you design a product or an environment to be the most widely usable by a wide range of users, right? So the prototypical example of universal design is the curb cut on the sidewalk, right? Universal design first emerged within kind of the architecture setting. So when you have a curb cut, we know that I'm going to keep doing this movement with my hands. That helps somebody who's a wheelchair user get onto the sidewalk rather than having to be on the streets. And I'll tell you, there are places on the University of Washington campus that still don't have curb cuts on the sidewalks. And when I am walking around those parts of campus with wheelchair users, literally they're on the streets because they can't get on the sidewalk. So we know that this benefits that population, but I also think back to when my kids were younger and they were in strollers, right? Really wanted to have a curb cut so I didn't have to pick the stroller up and get it onto the sidewalk. Or maybe it's that I'm going on a trip and I'm walking somewhere with my suitcase. The curb cut makes it a lot easier in that instance as well. So there's a variety of folks and reasons that might benefit from that change. And we can think about this too in an education setting. How can we be proactive in thinking about what our environment looks like? So that might be something like captioning videos. We know that deaf and hard of hearing participants might benefit from the captions on videos. But there's also research that suggests a variety of folks benefit from those. I turn them on in meetings all the time because it helps me pay attention. It helps me catch words I might have missed. Sometimes I'll go back and look at the transcript because I can't quite remember what somebody said. But there's also research that it benefits folks who are non-native speakers of English to better understand what is being said. So again, turning on those automatic captions as a way of providing access to a wider variety of folks is a way that you're thinking ahead of how can we change our environment to be usable to a wider variety of folks. Some other examples of things you might do, I've been to some conferences recently that automatically ask presenters to turn in their slides and provide those to all attendees, right? So that might benefit folks who can't go to every session. It might benefit folks who want to remember something from the session, who can't see the screen, or who want to take notes, right? There's a variety of ways folks could use that, and it could benefit not just folks with disabilities, but other folks as well. As you're thinking about institutional change too, can we go back to the other slide?
Oh, sorry.
Two, I would encourage you to think about the tenet, nothing about us without us, right? So this comes out of the disability community's activism, including people with disabilities as you're making change, and as you're doing things that are supposed to be more accessible for those folks, include people with disabilities in the decision-making process. Without it, sometimes we make decisions that really don't serve the population well. So I saw a great example of this earlier this week. Anthropology loved their clothes. They released a line of clothes that were supposed to be accessible. They had a picture of a woman in a wheelchair, and she had on a denim jacket that was covering the wheels and a long flowy skirt. And people with disabilities were saying, oh my gosh, they clearly didn't talk to any of us. I don't want my clothes to touch the wheels of my wheelchair. That's dirty. It's dangerous if it gets caught up in the spokes of the wheel and I end up falling out of my chair. And this really long flowy skirt is going to be a bunch of fabric bunching under my legs all day and be uncomfortable. And so, it's one of these things where they're like saying they did something great. They're trying to think about people with disabilities, but if they'd actually talked to people with disabilities, their designs likely would have been different. And we can think about that in an education setting as well of, for example, saying, well, we really wanted deaf students to have access, so we captioned the videos. Well, some deaf students are going to do much better with a sign language interpreter because English is in some ways a second language to folks who use sign language. So again, thinking about how you're including the disability community, also thinking about how are you including accessibility as part of any diversity, equity, or inclusion activities that you are doing, right? So oftentimes universities will think about accessibility as a compliance mindset, right? The Americans with Disabilities Act or whatever legislation says that these folks have to have access, so let's comply with the law. Not as something that we're doing as an equity activity to make things more equitable across our campuses, right? So if we're talking about equity and inclusion in our departments, are we thinking about accessibility? Are those initiatives actually accessible to people with disabilities? And then I just want to point out there are a variety of places that you want to think about how are you including people with disabilities, right? So that you might think about planning and policies and evaluation. If you're doing something like a climate survey, are you asking about the experiences of people with disabilities and how their experiences have been? Are you thinking about the facility and environment? Is the environment accessible? Is there enough lighting? Are there ramps? Is there braille signage? Those sorts of things. Do faculty and staff in your department or your institution know how to help a student get disability-related accommodations? Do they know how to interact with people with disabilities? As you're using technology, whether that's devices, whether that's software, whether that's web pages, are you thinking about accessibility, right? Can somebody who's a screen reader user, for example, use your website? We can go to the next slide. How are we creating a safe space for students and faculty with disabilities? Again, thinking about those tenets of universal design, thinking about how broadly we can make things usable, getting feedback about accessibility issues, right? Are you soliciting this from people with disabilities within your department? That could be a general request for information about accessibility. It could be on evaluations of events or courses. It could be in a climate survey or something like that you're doing. And then I think the important thing too is once you've been told that there is an accessibility related barrier, how are you addressing that? Are you making sure that it's addressed? Are you communicating that it's been addressed? Are you, again, getting feedback from people with disabilities about how we can do that? The other thing I would say is, how are we creating or building community amongst students or faculty with disabilities? One thing that I often hear from people with disabilities is that they don't know other people are in this space. So I think it's important to remember that, when we think about disability, we're often thinking about apparent disabilities, right? Maybe somebody who's a wheelchair user, who uses a screen reader, is blind or is deaf or hard of hearing, but there are many invisible disabilities, right? And sometimes these are the higher prevalence disabilities. So we might be thinking about students who are neurodivergent, who have learning disabilities, who have chronic health impairments, or mental health conditions. Those are not necessarily things that are apparent, and yet folks will benefit often from having community with other folks in a similar situation, whether that's to better understand how they might navigate their education or their career with their disability, whether it's to feel like they're less alone, or to share experiences. So, at some universities, we're starting to see disability cultural centers appearing as a place to build this community. There are student organizations at campuses and things like that can do that. And then again, I think it really creates a positive environment to teach about accessibility. And I won't say anything more about that because I know Yasmine is going to talk about it. But certainly it shows that we value disability inclusion when we're literally talking about it in the context of our curriculum. And then also thinking about how are we teaching in an accessible manner. So again, I'm going to call back to that idea of universal design, specifically universal design of learning. So this calls for in our courses, how are we thinking about multiple means of representation, right? So how are we giving folks information in multiple ways? So we talked it earlier, I said something about providing the slides to folks. Is there a way that folks can listen to a lecture, read the same information, and get information in multiple ways? Multiple means of assessment. Are we always testing our students in the same way, right? Are there options to take a test, to give presentations, to write an essay, right? Different ways that they are being assessed so that if a student doesn't do well on a test for a particular reason, they have other opportunities to shine. And then again, multiple means of engagement. This could be course discussion. It could be online course boards. I love in a Zoom meeting that I can type things in the chat because I'm much more likely as somebody with an anxiety disorder to type things in the chat to ask questions than I am to raise my hand and ask a question, right? So do students have those sorts of opportunities? Again, you often will be notified by your university about accommodations that students are entitled to, ensuring students receive those accommodations and that it's not a hassle for them. So you might need to do something like send a copy of a test over to a testing center where the student is taking it. Ensuring that that happens and is a seamless process for those students is really important in terms of being a welcoming place. And then finally, encourage students to talk to you about their needs and provide feedback about what's working, right? They aren't required to. No student with a disability has to walk up to you and tell you what their disability is. But if you invite that conversation and let them know that you want to know about whether things are working or how you could be doing things better, that's certainly a more welcoming environment. So just a few thoughts to get thinking about that stuff.
Thank you. All right. We'll go ahead and pin Yasmine.
Hi, thank you, Brianna, for this part of the talk. Really interesting and very engaging. My name is Yasmine Elglaly, and I work at Western Washington University in the computer science department. And I ran the KIND lab. And the main goal and vision for the lab is to try to make accessibility mainstream. So we won't be thinking about accessibility as something like we have to add, whether we're talking about software or talking about education, but just to be part of our everyday life, of everybody's everyday life. So what I'm really hoping to achieve from the research I'm doing with my colleagues and my students in the KIND lab. Did we go to the next slide? Yeah, so with that in mind, if I really want to make accessibility mainstream, I feel like one of the most straightforward to achieve this goal is just to spread the word among students. So teach students about accessibility. One way to do this may be by creating an elective course. And I'm working in the computer science department, so I'm going to focus my talk about teaching accessibility within computer science. You could create an elective course, and we cover all the different topics in accessibility. There is a really big, large list of topics we can cover in accessibility. But the point is that this elective will not be taken by everyone. So maybe just a small subset of students in CS would be able to take this elective. Another way to do it would be to teach accessibility in other CS courses, required CS courses, or courses that are available and easy to access by all students. And if we want to do this, it will be hard to incorporate accessibility into every single lesson, right? So what we can do is to make small changes in these courses we can think about CS courses maybe in like maybe 3 big groups. One group where we teach students about core CS topics, so something like computer systems, object-oriented design, algorithms, and then other set of courses that talk a little bit more about human-computer interaction, web design, graphics, animation. And we have also a group of courses, usually on AI, data science, machine learning, natural language processing. And if we're really hoping to see software products that are accessible, ideally, we would like our graduates who take all these kinds of courses to learn about accessibility, because in reality, it intersects with all these kinds of technologies. We want our VR and AR to be accessible. We want our chatbots to be accessible, right? We want to have all our websites and web apps to be accessible. So there is this need that we want our students who learn about all these facets of computer science to learn how to create accessible software. So making small changes to a course could help us to achieve this goal eventually. I'll give an example from a course that I teach called Computer Systems. And in this course, we use Linux. And when I think about the course, I taught this course many times at Western Washington University. And we usually talk about like how the operating system can handle input and output. And every time we talk about input and output, it's usually the screen and the keyboard. So this is kind of ableist, right? Because not everybody's using the screen or the keyboard. So I added a small activity to this course where I talked about refreshable braille display, and I integrated this to the course so students get to learn that, well, some people are going to use refreshable braille display. They are not going to use the screen. Here is the configuration file of the Braille TTY, the system file for the screen reader. And let's take a look at these configurations, and let's try to write a bash script to analyze these configurations. So it's just a small change to the course, and it didn't really change the focus of the course. It's very well integrated with the main topic. So that's one thing, like professors can do while they are teaching their courses, to just make a small change, maybe in one of their activities. In another experiment with a more sophisticated topic, I would say, when we try to integrate learning about accessibility in courses like machine learning and natural language processing, we found that it's a little bit more challenging. And maybe it's because these courses are very technical and they are already complex and difficult for students to learn. So adding another layer of difficulty, like talking about disability or how to make machine learning, like more inclusive or more fair for people with disabilities, it wasn't really like an easy journey. We went through different iterations of trying to incorporate accessibility and inclusion and fairness to these courses. And it was really hard to do it on our own, like with just professors sitting together brainstorming. What we found like really helpful is to sit down with the students. So we created focus groups, and we sat down with students who already took courses in HCI or accessibility and courses in machine learning or natural language processing, and talked to them and asked, okay, if we want to engage students who are taking machine learning courses with accessibility topics, how to do this. And they had like really very insightful suggestions that when we took into consideration, we were able to engage students with fairness topics in machine learning. So things that they suggested is to break down the topic into smaller pieces. So instead of just having maybe one lecture or one project on accessibility or on fairness for people with disabilities, let's begin with like maybe a short lecture or a very simple activity introducing the idea of ethics in general. And have this something to be related to the students, so something that's more practical and more relevant to them. So we began with a simple activity, asking them, well, how about like you go to your Google account or your Facebook account and try to download the data that they collected about you and write a reflection about this. What do you think? Do you think this is ethical that they collect all this data about you? Did you know that all this data were collected about you and how they profile you? So that's like a small activity at the beginning. And then we move a step forward, talking about collecting this data in a massive amount from like a massive number of users. And there was a paper in the news article that were discussing this topic. Now they were able to see the impact of big data, like how that can change and have impact on a large number of users, millions of users. And from there, we were able to make one step forward to intersectionality and now look at, like this example from this other research paper talking about BERT, which is a language model used heavily in natural language processing applications. And look at the biases that researchers have discovered in biases against people with disabilities and from different genders or from different races, and look how, like the language model is dealing with these different identities. From there, we were able to engage students. So I feel like a big part of teaching accessibility in complex topics is learning from students and know what can be helpful in reaching them and helping them understanding and appreciate the topic more. I would like. Okay.
Oh, sorry.
I
No.
wanted to add just like a small part is as professors who work in teaching focus institute, we may not have enough time or resources to like, for example, like analyze BERT and see like how biased it is or not. So we depend heavily, or at least like my group depend heavily on research in this area. And I would just like hoping that researchers, when they publish papers, that they would also make their tools or scripts available and open source, because it will help us as educators to adapt their materials, adapt their work, and teach this to the students, because it will be very time consuming to replicate their work and like rewrite their code or their scripts in order to teach what they did to the students. So it's going to be really helpful. And I usually cite their work, like tell the students, here are the sources that we base these lectures on. So like the work that the researchers do are very appreciated, and I would just hope that everyone would make their code and scripts available and open source. So this is what faculty can do in their courses. If we want to move on to the department level, how the department can support this change. If we would like to teach accessibility, well, if I'm talking, for example, talked in the previous slide on a small change I made in one course. My students take at least 5 courses per 4 courses per quarter, and we have 3 quarters. We're talking about at least 12 courses per academic year. It can be very difficult for them to remember what they learned, after they graduate, if they saw accessibility just once during this whole 4-year program. So ideally, we would like departments to adopt a holistic vision for, we want to teach accessibility. Here is the list of our courses. It can be maybe integrated at this level in this course and then reinforced in that course, at this level and so on. So we'll have a plan. And as the students will see the accessibility information or concepts reiterated from one course to the next and reinforced, and hopefully going from introductory level concepts to, more intermediate to advanced skills. By the time they graduate, they will really master the accessibility skills that are needed. So having this vision of the department is going to be crucial for the success of teaching accessibility. For instructors to be able to learn about accessibility, not everyone has a research background in HCI or accessibility or are familiar with the topics. So it will be necessary to support faculty as they learn about accessibility and learn how to integrate the topics into their own courses. Like if I'm teaching computer vision, could integrate it in one way. If I'm teaching graphics, I'm teaching, any other course, there will be different ways to integrate it. So faculty will need support in doing so. And one thing the department can do to support faculty could be to have workshops on site or maybe in other places, send them to conferences, webinars like these, could be helpful. So that can be considered as part of their professional development, something that the university or the department can help, by letting them take a day off and go attend this workshop, or support their travel to this conference so they can learn about that topic. From the work that I do, if I want to teach accessibility, and again, it's not yet mainstream, right? I may find that the lab I'm going to teach the course in, when I'm going to talk about screen readers, it's not installed on the lab, and I would need to work with the technical support at my university to make sure that the software that they need is installed on the labs, on the lab machines. So this coordination and collaboration is also necessary. I'm lucky that I usually meet people who are supportive, but it's just something also to consider, that it is really teamwork. As a faculty, it's hard to do it on your own. You need the support from the department, you need support from the and IT support to install the software that you need, from the students so they can help you improve how you teach about the topic. And yeah, because it's going to be an iterative process. I would expect that the first time you do something new in a course, whatever the new thing you're adding to the course is, it may not be the best version of it, right? And that you can learn about this maybe directly from the students, but also it can pop up in the course evaluations at the end of the course. And course evaluations are a good mechanism for faculty to get feedback, but also can be used by administration, in the process of promotion. So I would just also hope that for faculty who are trying new things, especially if they want to try teaching about accessibility, if something goes wrong and they are learning from that and they are going to improve in the future version of their course, that for whatever drawback that they had, they will not be penalized for it. They just it's going to be a learning process, and we need to be accepting the fact that, well, kids make something wrong or it can go wrong. So this is going to be really reassuring for faculty if they're trying to do something new. And on the other side, there is a really interesting paper that I really like a lot, talking about how teaching inclusive design across a curriculum in CS program helped with improving the overall climate for the department, and have helped with decreasing the rates for what we call DWF, the rates for dropping the course, withdrawing from the course, or failing the course. So if a department would like to incorporate inclusive design and accessibility into their curriculum, one thing that can support their mission is to track these metrics across the courses and running climate surveys and see how other students from or students from underrepresented groups or students with disabilities may progress and become more feel more belonging to the CS field, to the CS department. So it's going to also support the department in their efforts. It's going to be good investment for them. So not just like having students who will graduate with skills that are highly valuable and industry are seeking these candidates with accessibility skills, but also is going to improve the climate in the department. So having more diversity within the student body in the department. Yeah, so this is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmine. Yes. Okay, moving on to the chart. Let me put you on the screen here.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Richard Ladner, Professor Emeritus in the Paul G. Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering at the University of Washington, and one of the founding members of the Center for Research and Education on Accessible Technologies and Experiences, commonly called UW Create. And I'm still a member. I used to be the Director of Education, but I've stepped down from that. And this is primarily research and education. It's in the Paul G. Allen School. It actually cuts across other departments as well. And so it focuses on accessibility. I was also a principal investigator, which is kind of the head of access computing for 18 years. I just stepped down from that too. So you can see I'm sort of moving toward full retirement, but still I'm active. And Brianna is, the director of access computing, and she kind of mentioned what it does. It's a national program. It works with students, departments, community departments, industry, and organizations. For the students, it helps them progress in their careers, the students with disabilities. And then for the organizations and departments and industry, it makes them more welcoming, hopefully more welcoming for these people. And then also I'm a principal investigator or director or leader of Access CS for All, co-leader of that. And that is similar to access computing in some ways, but it's at the K through 12 level. And I've always been interested in K through 12 education. And I got my chance to do that now toward the end of my sort of career. So I don't teach anymore at the University of Washington, but I'm out there advocating for accessible education for K through 12. So you can move to the next slide. So I'm going to have a little preface here for K through 12 education in the United States. Of course, it's different around the world. Elementary education, we call it. And in the United States, it's maybe 55 million K through 12 students, which is more than some countries in Europe. And among those students, about 18% of them are identified as having a disability. And Brianna mentioned all the kinds of different disabilities they have. And once they're identified as having a disability, and that has to be done by a professional, they can get accommodations and so on. But as Brianna mentioned earlier, sort of using the principles of universal design for learning, you don't need an accommodation for a student necessarily, because your course or the class you're teaching is kind of like open to all sorts of people with learning disabilities, autism, neurodiversity, ADHD, and so on, so that they feel welcome in the class and things are working well. And if you would look up Universal Design for Learning, you'll find plenty of resources for that. The other thing is that, and I think this was also mentioned by Brianna, is that there are accessible curricula and tools. And in K through 12, it's kind of a sad story in the United States that so little of the curriculum and tools are fully accessible, especially to blind kids, to blind children. And so this situation has been noticed, and that there is an inequity that blind kids and other kids with disabilities are not getting a good education in the United States. So there is some new legal requirements that just came out last month from the Department of Justice and it covers not just K through 12 education, but higher education, graduate school, cities, counties, anything that the central U.S. government touches. So it's called a non-discrimination on the basis of disability accessibility of web information and services of state and local government entities. And schools are one of those entities. And it's a fairly long regulation, but it probably is going to have a lot of impact because this is the first time. I mean, there are laws already. We have the ADA in the United States. We sort of recognize the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's not a law here, but it's recognized at least. And we have other laws, IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and so on, but none of them really address this issue of accessibility that well. They talked about other things. And so the Department of Justice has taken these laws and put in some new regulations, or what they call rules, to make sure that education is accessible. So it's not just, it's going to be more difficult for these inaccessible curricula and tools to exist in the future. So why don't we go to the next slide then, Kendra? So how do you develop coding assignments that are accessible, inclusive, and equitable? First of all, you have to recognize that not all coding platforms are fully accessible. So you want to avoid these platforms, even though they're popular. Scratch, which is known worldwide, it's used by millions of children, is not screen reader accessible at all. I don't think it's Switch accessible either. And so maybe there's some other things that can replace Scratch, and things are coming downstream that can. A related programming language, block-based language, is Snap, which is popular in the United States. And again, a blind kid cannot use it. And we don't want to have an accommodation where, they have to use some other language. Why can't they use the language that everybody else uses? So that's the equity issue. And then Blockly, which is very popular in the United States. In fact, it's actually a platform, and many, many other people have sort of built their, it's an open source platform. So many sort of programming environments for robots, for all sorts of things that kids use are built on top of Blockly. And Blockly is sort of controlled by Google. And so Google is hard working to try and do accessible versions of Blockly. And so hopefully that'll come down in a few years. Currently, there are some alternative accessible platforms for programming. One is called the Quorum programming language, a programming environment. They also have an IDE called Quorum Studio, which is a development environment for Quorum. And there's a new block-based version of Quorum as well. And it's not very well known. It's not one of those well-known ones. But my gosh, it's a beautiful language, and it's fully functional, has many libraries to do all sorts of things, from data science to robotics to whatever. And then a sort of a smaller effort is this Blocks for All, which is sort of a replacement for Scratch, which is accessible. And the output for Blocks for All is a robot, as opposed to Scratch, which is a visual, non-accessible image or animation. And then finally, Apple has come out with something called Swift Playgrounds, which is also accessible. It's a little more limited in many ways, but it's something that kids who are blind can actually use. And I've seen demos of that. So, and I think there are other ones as well, but these are the three that just came to my mind. And none of these are popular. The popular ones are inaccessible, and the unpopular ones are the ones that are not popular yet are accessible. So, like I said, from the big picture, that shows that there are people like us, the three of us, that really care and are trying to make everything more accessible, at least in the United States. And I think around the world, I know there's plenty of people that attend from Europe, from South America, from Africa, from China that attend the accessibility conferences that I go to. And finally, in terms of pedagogy, and this is from my own teaching experience of over 50 years, that project-based approaches to courses really build motivation in your courses. So if people have ownership, students have ownership of what they're doing. They're not just repeating what you teach them. They get more excited. They learn more. They might not they might not have everything in their head in terms of all the things they're supposed to know, but they will be happy, and they'll actually learn a lot. And as they do these projects, they realize what they need to learn, and they are motivated to learn. And so I think this is particularly true at the K through 12 level, at least in the United States, is motivating students to be good learners. And so this project-based approach is really important. The next slide, I don't know if I have more. I can't remember.
Nope. But feel free to keep talking.
Yeah, I wanted to amplify Yasmine, and there actually is a book that just came out last month, and I put it in the chat, or what they call in the message stream, teaching accessible computing, and pretty much that's what Yasmine was talking about. How do you put accessibility into many courses? A little bit in every course, and so the students get exposed to it quite a bit, and so it becomes part of their psyche. And now I'm kind of out of K through 12, but there are efforts by the curriculum committees for the ACM and the Association of Computing Machinery, which is our big society, and also ABET, which is the accreditation board, to try and make accessibility part of the requirements for a computer science major in the United States. So I think that does it, Kendra.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm gonna we can move right into questions. I'm sure that you guys have a lot of those. I'll go ahead and pin our speakers back up so that you can ask all the exciting questions that you may have. And you can use the raise hand emoji, or type in the chat if you have a question, and we can try to adjust that for you.
I see Laura has a question.
All right. Yes, Laura.
First, Richard, I'm pretty sure I went to high school with your daughter. Katie?
Yeah, Roosevelt High School.
Yep.
Huh.
Yeah. But the question I have is that I actually, in a full circle moment, work for the University of Washington Bothell. I run the STEM Study Center, the tutoring center, and I'm wondering how you see these practices. How can we support faculty and support students through our tutoring services, our peer tutoring services, to promote UDL and the stuff y'all were talking about?
Oh, that's a good question. That sounds like a Yasmine question, though.
So you're saying, like, in the tutoring center, how would you support students with disabilities?
Well, more, sorry, my daughter is shrieking. More like, I would love to help support students both with disabilities, but also how to learn these stuff, maybe if they aren't learning them in their courses yet.
There's, sorry, Yasmine, I was going to jump in.
I'm blinking.
There's a great organization called Teach Access that teaches about, or is interested in teaching about accessibility in post-secondary education, precisely because it's not taught, and it's led by a lot of industry companies who want to see professionals who know more about accessibility. So they have some great resources that you might direct folks to, and their website's just teachaccess.org. I'll put that in the website or in the chat.
Yeah. And I would add to that they have, I think it's called a Teach Access Academy or something like that. And it's one week a month for 10 months, I think. Not 1 week, 1 hour or 2 hours every month, where kids can go in there and learn stuff on their own. And they have wonderful speakers, and some of them are really astounding experts in accessibility from around not just the United States, but around the world. So I think, that would be something that the students could do on their own, and you could advertise it.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Related to that too, I think is a question of whether folks who are working in the tutoring center know how to work with students with disabilities. And that is something that you could ask. I'm sure that the Center for Teaching and Learning on your campus would have folks who could support the tutoring center in supporting their tutors to work with students with disabilities.
For sure. We definitely we do trainings around neurodiversity, around equity and inclusion, around that. And so we'll add in a training this year about specifically having to do with accessibility. Yeah, thank you.
And there's a great TA training from Valerie Barr at Bard College. I'll look up the link for that and put it in the chat. And it's focused on equity more generally, but does include some information about disability as well.
And Sandro has a comment and question. I'm curious if you have insights on how gamified resources could impact neurodivergent students, and more importantly, if there are concerns or pitfalls to be aware of when considering gamified resources. This is Richard. I think the one thing I've said about gamifying is there's two sides to that. One is, are they developing games? Are they using games? And there are people that are, and I can't remember the names of them right now, and I can't put anything in the chat, but there are people that are doing this gamification for learning disabilities. And the idea would be that somebody, and this is for all learners really, not just learning disabilities, but people learn best when they're kind of at this sweet spot between being bored when it's just too complicated. I can't learn that. And being too easy. Oh, I'm bored. It's so easy. So you want to be in that kind of sweet area. And so people are using artificial intelligence and other methods. And I think this is a form of gamification. So they get from the information they're getting from the student and playing this in quotes game, they're able to ask the questions that are in that sweet spot to keep them engaged. So I think this is a kind of an area of research in learning. And I wish I knew more about it, but that's sort of at a very high level what I've heard about. I don't know if that helps, Sandra.
I'd probably add a small thing that, it could be difficult to have like one method that would work for all neurodivergent students. So like someone with ADHD may get, like super occupied by the game aspect. Someone else maybe with autism can find this engaging. So just something to keep in mind, because it's a big umbrella, can have so many different modes of work, and which one could work. Something that could work for one person may not work for the other.
I think we have time maybe for one more question if someone would like to address something or ask a question.
Sandra had a clarification, and
Mm.
Sandra, I don't know the answer. You know, I'd have to go into the literature and see what people are doing. I don't think there's anything sort of standard that people use, but I'm sure people are thinking about this, whether to use in computer science courses. And I'd be curious as to what they were doing in chemistry, a gamified approach. No, there is a faculty member here at the University of Washington, Zoran Popovic, who started a center based on this. And I'll try to find that center and put that into the chat if there's time. There's a couple of minutes. Take me a second.
No problem.
It's called the Center for Game Science.
Yasmine, I have a question for you. Um, so how we were introduced, I read your paper and got so excited about the methods that you use to get your students thinking about accessibility and inclusion, and how you applied it to your course, use those tools and that strategy, and then they took away from it this ability to think about these issues a bit more critically. I was wondering if you have any kind of new assignments or things you're planning on developing, creative assignments that again kind of will essentially do the thing that it did prior with the students and generating feedback from them, because I really like your assignment that you created and how essentially it gave you that feedback you needed about how they were thinking about these things, and you allowed them the freedom and the power to talk about, you know, their issues or their struggles. And I think that Richard and Brianna both touched on that is really important, empowering students with disabilities, especially unseen disabilities, because for students who have unseen disabilities or invisible disabilities, they're often, well, yeah, unseen, but they're it's often, we assume, right? And the bias is so much easier to create that they're normal or they're like everyone else. So do you have any kind of other assignments that you have in the works that going to apply these things?
Well, so working on different assignments really for different courses. And one thing, for example, I was trying to work on is to represent disabilities as like a data structure, like for object-oriented design courses. Yeah, but you know, talking about this other assignment, I feel like a good thing I learned about it is the power of reflection. You know, like yes, we teach students technical concepts and skills, but if we end the assignment with some reflection questions, it really makes a big difference and helps the students to just pause a little bit on like all the bugs that they had to face and all the other technical obstacles, and then think about the societal impact or the ethical implications of the software that they just worked with or tried to develop. Yeah, I think Pax is here, and he introduced me to this tool called Cards of Tarot. Right, Pax? Do you want to talk about that?
Hi, yeah. Yeah, I think it's called the tarot cards of accessibility or something like that. It's this really cool tool that I learned from a UX design course where it's a set of kind of tarot cards where you kind of take a little reading, and each of them on the back have prompts for different ways to think about your product or your tool or whatever it is that you're developing. So like, what happens if it becomes really big and this is like the next new Facebook? What would, how would your app affect people in that way? And it was a really cool method for me to kind of take a step back and think about how anything I develop would affect other people in different ways. And I think it was a pretty effective tool for some of the students that we were having take this course, as an ability to reflect and get prompts for whatever they're interested in and how it might affect others.
That's lovely. Ah, yes, thank you. I see that someone posted it. Ah, lovely. Well, thank you, Pat, for clarifying that. Yeah, we appreciate it. Okay, would anyone else like to add anything? Richard, Brianna, yes. Okay. All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone for coming. A recording of this webinar will be made available if you wish to have it, along with captions and a transcript, so that you can look back on what was discussed and also read it in a bit more detail. Feel free to email me or reach out to me if you have any questions. If there's something you would like to see us at Code Grade do with this topic, and how we can become more accessible and inclusive as well, would love to hear from you guys. And yeah, and also reach out to our speakers. They're lovely people. I really enjoy getting to know the three of them. And Yasmine, I think this conversation with us started months ago. And then you introduced me to Richard and Brianna, and it's just been lovely doing this with you guys. And I just love your passion for the topic. I'm passionate about it as well. All right, well, I wish everyone a lovely evening, and you guys a great day, because the day is just starting for you, right? Enjoy your coffees and your courses. And Richard, I hope your tooth is okay.
It's being pulled tomorrow.
Oh no, okay. My thoughts are with you. All right, well, thank you everyone for joining. Have a great day, evening, etc. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.